Awesome. Sweet. So yeah, you probably just had a few minutes to look it over, I assume, if that.
Yeah, briefly. Yeah, I mean, I looked through probably the first handful of pages.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I generally hand it out just a few minutes before I go through with people so they don't obsess over stuff in it, and
Right.
otherwise people get fixated on things and stuff.
Yeah.
So cool. Well, before we jump in, do you have any questions about what we're doing, or anything you've been curious about before we really get started with stuff?
I'm trying to remember what we do exactly at these sessions. Like if it's the
Right.
same we talked about almost a year ago or whatever, I can't remember exactly what we do.
Yeah. So the process I work with is called Aligned Living, that I created like 4.5 years ago, I guess now, 4 years ago. And what it basically is about learning to reference internally, about being able to connect with ourselves in a way that doesn't get us so sidetracked by our surroundings, that doesn't get us so inundated with all the emotional energy around us, so that there's a lot less static and a lot more clarity. And it's really an interesting piece that everybody has a certain way of being with their energy field, a certain way that they've learned to cope with their surroundings and find effective ways to navigate life. And so we develop systems energetically. And so this is basically about resetting that and helping us really focus on our own clarity and still create even a stronger awareness of our surroundings, because we don't get so fixated on specific things. But being more in flow and being more clear about what serves us and how we serve others.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the overview of it.
Yeah. Do you need, or would it be helpful for me to give you any background, or do you just go right into this? Or?
Yeah, I mean, we'll just jump right in. And I think the background everything always makes sense, It's like there's never something we come across that's like an anomaly that doesn't match the rest of what you've experienced in life. There's always a seamlessness to it. And so, yeah, it'll all make sense. And I'm sure there'll be stories that'll come up as we dive in here. And so, yeah, I think some themes will really pop up today for you, which really just jumped out of the Harrison, which everybody has them, the places where we really flow and the places where we tend to get gummed up and loop and all the things that make us feel frustrated in life and the things that make us feel alive and excited. And so it all shows up in these 40 pages and probably on 4 of them more in particular.
I mean, I've changed a lot over the past 2 years working with Guy and Elon. Well, I guess, I mean, I did their Ascension program, so that's the past year, but then probably about 8 months or so before that, I did their master class and some other things. And so in a lot of ways, I've changed as a person in a lot of ways, like really noticeable ways.
Nice.
But I'm very, very much so confused and stuck with where I'm currently at and trying to figure out where I want to go from here.
Yeah, that showed up a lot.
The way I look at it, it's sort of like I was sort of okay with things for a long time. I've had a lot of the problems with depression, things like that. Okay. So I've allowed myself to sort of put up with a lot of crap that I probably wouldn't have done if I didn't have that baggage and just weight on me.
Yeah.
And so as I've started improving myself internally, there's become this big rift between kind of where I was at before.
Yeah. What used to be tolerable and what's no longer tolerable.
Exactly. And so now I've changed so much and I'm going, I just can't be in the situation anymore.
Yeah, my cage doesn't fit me anymore.
Exactly. I don't know where to go from here. I'm
weird.
I'm confused. It's just this weird world that I'm stuck in.
That all really showed up in the Harrison too, which we'll talk about. And that whole piece of wanting to be sure as you set a trajectory, and the challenges of being optimistic about where you're going, the challenges of being really trusting that you've done enough analysis that you're making the right decision. Those all showed up. And, right off the bat, the first thing that comes in for me is that whole piece of setting a trajectory that is right for you as far as the first step forward. And I think that this is kind of a fundamental piece for you that gets you stuck, is that there's a real discomfort in going on an adventure that doesn't necessarily have a clear destination. And so when you step forward, you want the first several steps and knowing where you're going to arrive. And the universe is asking you to kind of take this. It's funny, the magical mystery tour is the words that are showing up, that says it's okay to and almost imperative to create an idea of where you think that is. Like, okay, I think that I'm going to nail down a few things that I know my life has to be that is not this cage that I'm living in. There has to be a certain level of freedom, a certain level of freedom in my schedule, a certain level of room for me to self-discover, room for me to grow. And I also need to feel stability. I need to feel that financial security with it. I need to have a sense of foundation with it. And so when you put those into place, like, okay, well, that basically identifies what your agreement is moving forward. And so you go, okay, well, what does that look like? And you come up with some ideas, and they may feel like a really clear hit, like, yes. And so here's where the illusion often breaks for us, is we start to take those steps, and then all of a sudden what we thought we were walking towards starts to dissolve. And we're like, what the hell? Like, I thought I was really clear, and so I must have been doing it wrong. I must have misstepped. I must have, like, our self-trust, our trust in our guidance, our universe starts to dismantle. And really the way that when we're navigating out of a cage, so to speak, it's never like, okay, door opens, we walk out, we arrive at the next destination. It's kind of a maze we have to walk through. And so there's a lot of changes in direction, a lot of tacking that we end up doing in order to get there. And so we may get a hit that looks perfect. We take 3 steps and all of a sudden we hit a wall. And we're like, what the heck, man? I knew that was a direction. And it was this direction for the first 3 steps, but our sense of wanting security wants it to be the destination as well. And so when we start to identify it as what is my next right action rather than where am I going, we start to trust a little bit being blind in our destination, but yet still really clear in what our next step is.
Yeah.
And that's going to be the transformation for you. That's going to make life feel exhilarating. That's going to make life feel fun and safe, and having a solid foundation. But when you put that foundation out in, I need to know what I'm creating versus I need to know what my next step is, it makes it elusive, and hope is a lot harder to find because it's just not available right now.
Right.
Does that all make sense?
Yeah, and I'm totally falling into that, where I do tend to think, okay, it was actually just last week I was talking to Guy and Elon, and I said, well, I feel like there's this darkness all around me.
Mm-hmm.
And I can step in any direction.
Yeah.
I literally have no idea where I should be stepping right now.
Yeah.
And they said, well, just step somewhere
Mm-hmm.
and see what happens.
Yeah, shake things up a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, which for me is a difficult thing to do, because I don't, I want to be more like that. I feel like I need to be more like that, but I've never been that way really. And so, I mean, there's a piece of me that's always been adventurous, but then there's another, like a really kind of down to earth, like I need steps.
Yeah.
Processes kind of a thing.
Absolutely. And I would say it goes right to the question you've been asking for clarity on, is what's my destination? And that you're not going to get that answer right now. When you change the question is, what is my next right action? Like, oh, well, that we can tell you. And when you know your next right action, it kind of becomes a little bit of a treasure hunt. It becomes a little bit of a following the puzzles, and it can be playful and fun. But if our whole focus is on, man, I don't know where this goes, like, yeah, you don't. And so if you're solving an equation and all you focus on is the unknowns, rather than using the knowns to start that process of deciphering the unknowns, it's an impossible puzzle to solve, because the unknowns don't reveal until you start working with the knowns.
Right.
And so that's where we're going to start, is with the knowns, and then expand out from there to, okay, so if we know this, then okay, now I know one more thing. And so we take that step. And this is another place where I can feel a lot of old fear show up for you when it's showing up. And it does, like, it feels like you're in a place to do all this now. So I think it's really going to change. But that piece of being inside the maze, it's almost like you feel like you need to hold your breath when you're in it. And the good news and the bad news is that maze is life. And so holding your breath is going to create a huge discomfort, rather than it being discovery. That it's like, okay, I'm actually on this exploration rather than on a trip. It's, and when you set your destination with a different, not a concrete, I'm going to be doing this at this place at this time, but my destination is I'm going to move into a greater fulfillment. I'm moving into greater happiness. I'm moving into greater exploration and self-expression. I'm enjoying it with my family. All of these pieces that become your destination now start to look different because they're not about a concrete outcome, but they're about an experience that you're calling in.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense too?
Yep.
And that starts to feel tangible. Because if we don't know, like where it's going to be or who it's going to be with or what it's going to look like it's so hard. Like it just feels like open-endedness and unknowns, and we get stuck in the unknowns. But when we can isolate an unknown, solve that one, it's funny. Do you have a math background or a finance background or something? Because I keep saying everything is equations. It's like, you got the constants on one side and all the variables on the other, and you're like, oh my God, there's so many damn variables. It's like, well, let's pull one variable over at a time and play with that and let that be the game. Because if you take, it doesn't matter how big the equation is, if we break it down into small segments of the equation and solve what's in the parentheses first. Like the rest of it's not relevant while we're solving what's in the parentheses.
Mm-hmm. So, no, I don't have a math background or anything.
That's funny. Is that how it feels like your brain works in that way?
I think I probably do work that way a little bit.
Yeah. And so, that's funny. I actually used to teach math, and one of the things, like when kids would get overwhelmed by the equation, I'm like, forget, like, let's just take these parentheses, pull them out of the equation and solve this. Like, can you solve that? Like, well, of course, there's only like 3 things to solve. All right, well, the rest of the equation is not relevant until this is done.
Right.
And that's really, it's so applicable to your experience, I think.
I had I have 4 kids, and my son, he's 11, and kind of just along the lines of what you were just talking about, he had it was math, ironically, and he had like 3 pages of just tons of stuff he had to do. And he comes into my room and he goes, "Hey, Dad, I can't figure this out. Can you help me with this?" And so I looked at it and I asked him how long he'd been working on this one problem.
Yeah.
And he said, I don't know, like an hour or something. This one, it's just this one little, it was like the second problem of 40.
Oh, gosh. Just stuck, right?
Yeah, he was totally stuck. And so I looked at it and I said, well, do you know how to do the problems that come after this one? Like, could you figure those out?
Yeah.
And he goes, well, yeah, I can do those ones. And I said, well, why don't you go just skip the one you're on at the moment that you literally cannot figure out? Go do the other ones.
Yeah.
Get your homework basically finished, because otherwise you're never going to finish your homework, and then come back to that one. And it was kind of this revelation, like, oh, I can do that. Like, I don't have to do it in order. And
yeah.
So I don't know, that kind of makes me think of maybe I'm falling into the same thing a little bit.
Yeah, it's human nature too, It's like we think of where we need to go, and then we wait in line, and we're awfully conditioned to do that. It's funny. I always laugh when I go to Costco gas. I'm like, there's always a line that's open, and like there'll be like, 9 of the lines will be like out the door, and I'll look and I'll be like, okay, where didn't people go? And I'll just drive around the outside and go to the one where there's like 2 cars, and I'm like, why are all these people in these other lines? It's like, it's so bizarre, but people are just like,
yeah.
And as soon as we stop thinking, like doing the thing that's in front of us in that way, it's like, okay, what feels like the next right action? Freedom starts to show up. That's awesome. Cool. Well, should we dive into the Harrison then and take a look at it? I'll screen share with you too, so that way I can point it out on my on mine. So let me see here. Share. There it is. Awesome. So, excuse me. So yeah, so basically what the Harrison is, and then when you took it, you know, a lot of times people are just like, I don't think this is going to give much information. Like it's kind of a bizarre thing to look at because you're like, so what? I take like 17 lists and I put them in order from what I enjoy the most to enjoy the least. How is this going to kick back anything meaningful? But
Right.
it's really pretty sneaky the way it works because a lot of what it focuses on are the items we put on the bottom. And so by force ordering, meaning things that not only am I focusing on what I like, but I'm also pushing stuff to the bottom that I don't enjoy. It kind of sneaks in past our firewall, and we start giving up a bunch of information that we may not have even shared with ourselves. And so the first part, I'll just read some of it to you, and then we'll get into more of the breaking down. And so don't worry, I won't read the 42 pages to you, but I will read a couple things at the top here.
Sure.
And so the first part is the strongest traits. It enjoys collaborating, dislikes structure, and likes to plan. Those are like your go-tos generally, meaning that whenever there's an opportunity to do those things, that's almost always what you choose, is what it feels like. Then the strong traits are just a little bit, you know, strong inclination, but not quite as strong. The analytical, careful with risks. Again, it's about taking, you know, going out on the limb there and diving in and realizing that you've done enough planning. And so when likes to plan is like almost a 10 on the scale, it really sometimes we get stuck in it because it feels like such a, you know, a place where we really enjoy being, but then the frustration can kick in. So it has creative ideas, frank, helpful, wants high pay, idealistic, and realistic, which we'll talk about in relation to optimism too, how those sometimes can challenge each other. Warmth has unclear goals, so this is, and lacks goal enthusiasm, which often go hand in hand. If we don't know what we want to do, it's really hard to get enthusiastic about it.
Mm-hmm.
Self-certain, now as we get to reasonable strong traits, self-certain, intuitive, can be blunt in communication, takes initiative, willing to grow, and organized. And so any surprises that showed up there for you?
The likes to plan. Yeah, I guess that's true. I do like to plan.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it showed up like as a life theme, like
right.
you really like it's your go-to. And we'll talk more, but there's also something happens with this because that likes to plan and the unclearness around goals and stuff. There's a flip that sometimes happens that may be confusing as you look at that likes to plan, because it also sometimes comes with a strong impulsiveness where you get so frustrated of like, oh my God, like I don't even know now I've planned so much. And then all of a sudden you just jump forward and dive in without looking as much.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I see likes to plan, but then has unclear goals. It just seems like there's a lot of contradictions in my life.
It happens. It happens. And that's where a lot of the frustration can show up, right? Is when you're trying to plan, but you're not given what, like, you know, if your go-to is planning and you don't know what you're planning for, it can be a very uncomfortable place to be. I don't need to tell you that.
Collaborating. Right? I mean, I remember some of the questions I answered on there. Mm-hmm. I mean, I do like collaborating. Mm-hmm. I like collaborating with people I like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Unfortunately, the situation I'm in right now, I'm around a lot of people I don't like. Mm-hmm. And I guess that creates kind of a disconnect in my mind, where I'm just so used to being around people. Because I've grown in a certain way, mm-hmm. I've pulled apart from the people I'm around. I used to kind of put up with a lot of the stuff that would go on, but now I'm just sick of it. But if it was the right
that's one of the dangers of awareness and self-discovery, right?
Right.
Like, oh, now I can see every little bit of it. Yeah, it makes sense. And so we'll see how this all fits together, because there is a bit of paradox. In fact, there's a whole section in here called the paradox technologies, which that's, I think, really where a lot of clarity is going to show up for you, because you'll see how these things that seem like they're opposites are actually very connected.
Okay.
Awesome. So I'll read the summary descriptions, and we'll jump into a little bit more about how this whole thing works.
Yeah.
So summary descriptions. Russ's task preferences are in order of preference: teaching, researching, or learning new information, doing something that helps others or society, making presentations to groups, analyzing facts, problems, and decisions, and organizing something. Russ prefers to avoid the following tasks listed according to greatest dislikes. First, doing clerical work and driving a vehicle. Russ would be interested in work that involves children, science, writing and language, health and medicine, selling, psychology, manufacturing, biology, medical science, computer software, and computer hardware. Russ lacks interest in food. Russ needs a work environment that involves working with the general public, the opportunity to occasionally get up and move around, few repetitive and monotonous tasks, and a quiet setting. And I would take the general public, that, you know, it may just be like where there's interactions with people, and like you said, people that you enjoy too, I think.
Right.
Russ is currently somewhat discouraged about the future. Russ is very much at ease and relaxed while working. Russ is very forthright or frank. Russ is very helpful and responsive to others' needs. Russ has a strong intention to improve himself. Russ enjoys trying to influence others. Russ is very empathetic and warm. His warm-heartedness will enable him to influence others more successfully. There are some interpersonal areas in which he could improve. Russ has moderately low self-esteem. What that really refers to, I think, is the frustration between what you're trying to create and where you're feeling stuck. Although Russ, sorry?
No, I was just going to say, I've had, you know, again, probably tied around the depression and stuff, but I've had low self-esteem just in general for a long time. That's kind of held me back also.
Right. We'll be doing some work with that for sure.
Yeah.
Sure. All right. Although Russ has a strong intention to improve himself, Russ may occasionally tend to be a little hard on himself. At times, Russ may be a little reserved with regard to meeting and interacting with new people. Russ is highly motivated by a chance to take initiative, having challenging work, an opportunity to earn high pay, and an opportunity to do something worthwhile for society. He's demotivated by seeing no opportunity to earn high pay and receiving insincere praise. That's interesting. I don't see that one show up very much. That's interesting that triggered as one of the things they keyed in on.
The very last part?
The insincere praise, yeah.
Yeah.
Russ enjoys analyzing facts and situations. Russ is extremely willing to collaborate with others with regard to making decisions. Russ tends to be careful about taking risks. Russ is not very optimistic about the outcomes when he does take risks. Russ has a very strong tendency to analyze the potential difficulties of plans and strategies, making it more likely that once he has come to a decision, he will have thought through the important issues. Russ may at times tend to agonize over decisions too much. Russ tends to put too much weight on the potential pitfalls of a plan compared with the potential benefits. When making decisions, Russ frequently prefers to try a new approach to a situation. So how does all that land?
Pretty accurate.
Yeah, this kind of keys right in on it.
Yep.
Awesome. And so now we'll jump into some of the analysis of everything.
Okay.
So the way this works is it basically takes, I think it's like 162 different traits, and it gives you a rating based on preference. So it's not necessarily based on ability level, yet it often does lead into that, because when we prefer to do something, we tend to seek out more opportunities for it. We value it. We develop more skill sets in it. And when we devalue something, or when we don't enjoy something, we tend to devalue it. We tend to avoid it, find workarounds. And so it often does show up as skill set, but not always. Sometimes there's things we are good at that we wish we weren't. And we'd much rather not do them.
Mm-hmm.
But it does show a real how our behavior and decision making gets driven. And so if we look over here, the reliability is 90.6. It has a built-in tracking to basically see how likely their accurate and truthful answers were. And so we know we're working with a really high reliability. And then we look at all these scores. And so basically you're given a score from a 2 to a 10 on each of these traits. And it's shaped a little bit like a bell curve, even though it's quite different than that. That as you get further out, the difference between like an 8 and a 9 is much bigger than the difference between a 5 and a 6. And so when we look at this in terms of drive, a 6, that 5, 6, 7 range is really neutral. It's like, they're tasks you'll do, but it's not something you would avoid. It's also not something you would seek out. They're just kind of like, okay, it's what needs to get done. And then as you move up into the higher numbers, these are things you start to, like when you're looking at life, there's always this multiple choice bank in front of you. If these higher items are on it, it's going to be what you're going to generally gravitate towards. It's what you're going to find yourself naturally doing. And then the stuff on the other end are the things, the lower ones are the ones you're going to naturally steer away from and often devalue, often not see as important. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so when we look at this, the 9.6, the collaborative, the tendency to collaborate with others when making decisions. And that may be part of the analysis process, which is, again, analyzing pitfalls, planning, experimenting, and then influencing. So all of these top 4, that collaboration, analyzing pitfalls, planning, and experimenting, it's really, and again, these can change over time. So right now, if you're really trying to figure out what is it that you're wanting, that collaboration could be what you've been doing with Guy and Elon. It could be what you're doing with other members in the Satori Prime groups. Analyzing, planning, experimenting. This really points to a lot of trying to figure out what's next, right? And so at other times in your life, these might not have been as high, but right now they're really, top of mind for you of what you're really craving. Does that make sense too?
Yeah. Yep.
And then it moves from influencing to helpful, wants high pay, cause motivated, warmth and empathy, wants challenge, that frank, direct communication, the tendency to be straightforward, direct, to the point, and forthright, analytical, and self-improving. So these are all like big themes for you right now. And so now as we start to get down into the 7s, they tend, they have some play to them, but we're starting to get into less influence. So a little bit more neutral in the way that you respond to these things. And now we'll keep scrolling down because the outliers are the ones that are really going to give us the most data about what's driving you right now. And so strongly prefer not to do that tolerance of structure, 2.1, which probably means that you're stuck in some of that situation right now where it really feels like a cage, following rules, schedules, and procedures. Is that what's happening?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then risking, the tendency to feel comfortable with business ventures that involve uncertainty. Again, this is what we talked about at the very beginning. And then feeling enthusiastic about it. And the tempo, the enjoyment of work that needs to be done quickly. And I would say even when the tempo is set by others, where that pressure comes in. And then the self-acceptance, the tendency to like oneself, I'm okay the way I am, and optimistic are all really kind of at the bottom end here for you. Does that all make sense?
It does. Yeah. And like you said, I can actually see some of these things changing. I think it's my current situation.
Yeah. It's
a lot of this.
Yeah, it's a very dynamic test. It's very much about taking a snapshot where you're at right now.
Right.
And which is, I sometimes it just forces realizations where like, oh, wow, this kind of snuck up on me, or it just makes it so clear of like, yeah, that I do feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Yeah. So any questions on this first part?
No, not right now.
Okay, awesome. So then it gets into this reports can also be used like by a supervisor to work with their employees. Sometimes it's used in hiring, it's used in managing, and it's used in coaching. And so this retention and engagement factors are, what keeps Russ involved. And so wants flexible work time is a 10, like everything else goes from 2 to 10 or 2 to like, I mean, you don't really see a 10 very often. So this must be really kind of riding on you right now. Wants development, wants work-life balance. So you can see all of these, and I don't want to spend too much time on it. It's funny, wants social opportunities is all the way down at the bottom, and wants personal help and wants appreciation. Like there's a little bit of like stay out of my space stuff going on for you too.
Yeah.
All right. then the task preferences. And I'm going to just go through these really quick. These, excuse me, the asterisk, when you see them, it just means there was some inconsistencies. I don't think we had any with the others. Let me just, oh yeah, there is assertive, the tendency to put forward personal wants and needs. So that it probably means that it's very circumstantial for you. Like sometimes you really want to be assertive, and other times you're not. Does that ring true to you?
Yeah.
And then relax, the tendency to feel at ease and calm while working. Yeah, it feels like there's just certain things that are really trigger points for you right now. And the same with computers and manual work, it showed up. All right, so let's go down then to what I would consider to be the kind of the best part of this whole thing, the most useful. And this is the paradox theory technology. And so the way this works is it takes two traits to look at a time that generally people would consider to be opposite. It's like you're either one or the other, you know, like, so the example they give here, and this isn't your score, but like this one, they're comparing frankness with being diplomatic. Like, well, are you frank or are you diplomatic? Are you somebody that talks about it how it is, or are you somebody that's always trying to find a way to make it, you know, cushion it and soften the conversation? But the truth is that these can actually be tied in together. And so in this case, like when we're able to be frank and diplomatic at the same time, we end up in forthright diplomacy, meaning that we're very clear and diplomatic. But what happens is we tend to have imbalances. We tend to find that greater value in frankness or greater value in diplomacy, and then we tend to be a little lopsided, or very lopsided in some cases, in how we value these traits. And so what we're going to look at is 12 different traits, and they're all going to be graphed for you on 4 quadrants that look like this. And so along the bottom, the x-axis here, we're looking at gentle traits, which are more passive, like diplomacy was the one that in that example. And then along the y-axis, or the vertical axis, we're looking at dynamic traits, more active, more visible traits quite often. And then basically the score that you received for each of those gets graphed on here. And so, you know, it's basically 2 to 10. And if you're in the top right-hand quadrant, this is really where we tend to be most effective in a balanced versatility, meaning that both these traits, we've developed a way to interact with them that works really well for us and is clear, and we're balanced and versatile in them. Now, if one trait's more developed than the other, so here the bluntness or the over the diplomacy, it would be an aggressive imbalance. If the diplomacy was more developed than the bluntness, it would be a passive imbalance. And so we tend to fall into either one of those traps, or if we're low in both, a balanced deficiency. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And so we'll look at this example. Again, this isn't your score, but this is just a person we'll use to have an example. And so this particular person, can you see it okay? Or I can blow it up a little bit too.
No, I can see it. Yeah, I have a copy here also that I can look at.
Awesome. So this particular person scored a 1, 2, 3, and a 3 on diplomacy and a 3 on frankness. And so they end up not feeling comfortable being frank, not feeling comfortable being diplomatic, and they generally avoid communication. So this is where their score land, and then this range around at these concentric circles shows their general range of behavior. And so this person almost always avoids communication. And so whenever we have either an imbalanced, where one score is higher than the other by at least 2 points, or a balanced deficiency like this one where they're both low scores, we end up with flips. And that flip means that this person's going along avoiding communication, and they're in a meeting and something comes up and it really triggers them. The person that never says anything all of a sudden gets super blunt and says something like, whoa, where did that come from? Or they also have a flip that's basically like when they kind of lose their normal way of behavior and they become super evasive. They may end up walking out of the meeting or completely, disappearing from the situation. Does that make sense?
Yep.
is red. Awesome. And so let's look at your charts. And the page we're going to look at here, basically we're taking 12 different charts and we're breaking it down into 3 different categories. So they're interpersonal, working with yourself and others, achievement, and leadership. And then we're breaking it down into 4 stages. So there's the initiating stage, there's a motivating stage, implementing, and then maintaining. And so we're kind of going to walk through a story here, so to speak, of how you tend to interact in each of these situations. And so this first part, we're starting with the initiating. So this could be the beginning of a project. It could be when you first start working with people. It could be, whenever anything new is arriving. The interpersonal aspect of it that they look at is opinions. And so when you're forming your opinions, you have a high level of certainty. You have an 8, which is a nice healthy level. Quite often when we get into the 10s, it tends to be something we overdo, but 8s are really, really healthy. And the same thing with open reflective. Now you have a 7. So there's a really nice balance of truth exploring, where you almost always end up in that, very seldom over on the dogmatic side. And there's no flip because this is very balanced for you. Does that make sense? Does that feel like that's how you know yourself?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay, cool. And then as we move into the achievement category in the initiating, now we're looking at the decision approach. And so very analytical right up here on a 9, and yet still also very intuitive, almost an 8, which puts you squarely in that logical intuition where you're using your discernment, you're using your intuition, and it feels very balanced. And again, no flips because there's not an imbalance. You're very predictable in how you'll show up here in this way of being. Does that feel true to you too?
Yep.
Nice. Now, as we move into leadership here, in the idea of being strategic. So this is where your high 10 for analyzing pitfalls puts you, in this case, we look at it in comparison to your comfort with risking, and risking being a 3, right? So there's a pretty strong imbalance here, which makes you tend to be very cautious when you're initiating things. And so that idea of forming opinions, coming up with decisions, and sorting through everything feels really comfortable. And then that analysis paralysis is kind of a way a lot of people describe it, where you get really caught up in making sure, like running through all the potential pitfalls. And this is also one of the things that sucks the optimism out for you, is you get so caught up in what could go wrong, and trying to ensure a positive outcome, assure reaching the goals, that sometimes you don't take that first step. Yeah. Because there's an imbalance, that this can become such an uncomfortable place to be, you have a flip here. And the size of the flip is also relevant to how big it shows up. And so you'll be like stuck, and then you're like, screw it, I'm just going this way. And people are like, whoa, you're like from the outside, it probably looks like you were just super impulsive and you just jumped. It's funny that when I was looking at your chart earlier, I was seeing this vision of you like getting yourself, like you're on a bungee cord like platform or something, going like, like getting all caught up inside yourself of like, okay, I can do this. And then all of a sudden, like, okay, I'm going off. And they're like, whoa, hang on. We didn't even hook you in yet. But that whole piece of like, I can't stand this stuck energy anymore. So I'm just going to jump. Like, I'm going to build up my courage, and I'm just going to almost a little bit of blind faith. Does that make sense?
I do tend to be that way. I mean, even with stuff at home sometimes. I mean, I'll think about things, plan it, I'll kind of run through everything, and then all of a sudden I'll just sort of do something.
Yep.
And whether it's my wife or someone else, they're like, whoa, where'd that come from all of a sudden?
Yep.
I just kind of do it. And it does seem kind of imbalanced a little bit.
Yeah, and what that's really about is that you hold yourself in the analysis for so long that it becomes so uncomfortable that at a certain point you hit the eject button. And so when you allow yourself to, instead of it just being, looking at the pitfalls, starting to look more at what could come out of it, starting to get excited about potential possibilities, and becoming more comfortable in the risking aspect of it. Because instead of it being a moderate risk or a mild risk, it becomes a pretty intense risk, because now you left your planning and you just jumped.
Right.
And so, when that comes into our awareness of like, oh, actually I'm taking a big risk now instead of a mild risk, maybe I just need to get more comfortable taking mild risks, and then that big risk won't show up because I won't be so uncomfortable. And this is
Yeah.
an area I think where a lot of your discomfort comes from.
Mhm.
Does that ring true?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I might be jumping the gun here, but I guess I've got two questions. Is
Mm-hmm.
this a bad thing? And also, can this be changed? Or is this really just pointing out this is just who you are and be
Yeah,
aware of
life
it?
sentence. Sorry, buddy. No, I'm just kidding. It shows a pattern for you, right? And so we break patterns by realizing that we want something different. We break patterns by being in them for so long that the fear of overcoming them becomes much smaller than the pain of being in them. And so this is like, there's a perfection to where you're at right now with like, okay, I can't do this anymore the way I've been doing it. Like this is the discomfort is high, which makes the risk not feel like as big a deal. And what you've been doing with that high discomfort is you've been taking bigger risks because you're just jumping as opposed to going like, you know what, I have all this data. If I can just allow that data to drive my decision making instead of it feeling like too much and I need to just escape from it and lose track of, because it's such a strong skill set for you. Like you're really good at it, but when it feels uncomfortable for you, when you get stuck in it, it works against you.
Mm. Yeah, that makes
And
sense.
so when you can befriend it and allow it to minimize the risk, but instead you've been maximizing the risk by getting so uncomfortable in it and then jumping.
Yeah.
Which again, like, oh, that didn't work out. Now I'm losing my optimism because it's here or there. But the truth is, it's not here or there. They're like, okay, let's take a look at the data and make an informed decision.
Well, I think I don't know. What comes to my mind here a little bit is it's draining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It feels really draining sometimes. Like
Yeah.
I spend so much time analyzing stuff and
Yeah.
planning it out. It takes a lot of energy to do that. And so I think sometimes I'm so exhausted that I might not even do anything at times just because I've just burned myself out.
Yeah. And so absolutely. And so that also is really connected to the risking, because in your sense of comfort, there's a feeling that you need to have a certain amount of data, a certain amount of analysis before it's safe to make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
And some people will look at stuff, they'll read the bullet points, go, got it, and they'll run for it, right? And you're like deep into the fine print, every line in the contract, so to speak, going through it. And as opposed to like, what do I really need to know out of this in order to make it an acceptable risk?
Yeah.
And so that's just like the area where you get the most stuck. Is that feeling of like, well, if I can get myself even more clear, I need to do that before it's a good idea for me to take that risk, take that step. And then there's a different degree of like, well, what is enough information? What is enough clarity?
Right.
And it's got to be functional too, right? And so, and ideally we'd have all the information and make a decision from that place. But what you're running into is a clash with functionality. Does that feel true too?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Awesome. And so this is exciting when we're dealing with this stuff, because like if this comfort with risking goes up, it's funny because a lot of people that score like 9s or 10s in risking don't identify it as risking. Like, I'm a quick decision maker. I feel exhilarated by them. Like, right, you're taking a risk. I don't really see it that way.
Right.
But so it's it's a word that can be described through, but you don't find exhilaration right now. And going, all right, let's try this and see how it works.
Yeah.
So
awesome. Far, all of this seems pretty spot on.
It gets a little spooky at times. How did I give them this information? It's like when you look back at the questions. This guy Dan Harrison that designed it, he's a genius. Awesome. All right, so next is the motivating stage. So now we've gone from the initiating to motivating, getting motivated to take the steps. And so this is self, and so this is really about your communication with yourself. self-improvement, quite high for you, yet healthy. And then the self-acceptance is a 4. And so this is where the challenge runs in for you, because you end up being in such a self-critical place. You still hit the healthy self-esteem, but on days when you're not feeling on the upper end of yourself, you end up down here pushing yourself pretty hard. And then at times when it shows up on the outside, where you've been really hard on yourself and already basically, gave yourself such a strong beating that you don't have the bandwidth to take a beating from anybody else, then the defensiveness comes in. And it's a smaller flip. Like, it's not something that happens a lot for you, but I would say it's when you've, I can hear you saying probably to your wife of like, can't you see I've already beat myself up about this? It's not helpful for you to beat me up too.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that happens.
And so that whole piece of, it's a beaten horse syndrome. It's like a couple of, kicks, maybe a couple of slaps on the butt, get things going. But anything more than that, it's like, okay, now I don't have the energy to move because I'm so depleted by what I just put myself through.
Right.
And it's, I think that one of your ways through this is like, I think effectiveness is something that you can really identify with. And so when you start to identify something, it's like, is this an effective way to do this? Is this assisting me to show up more powerfully? Is this assisting me to be more clear? And if it's not, I can start removing it from my to-do list. And so this being so self-critical, there's a certain amount of feedback that you need to give yourself, but then there's also a certain amount of encouragement and a certain amount of internal conversation that says, oh, of course, like, when you find yourself self-critical, even being like, okay, well, I was trained to do this. And so it's going to take some time. So I don't need to beat myself up over beating myself up. I need to just recognize it and start to be more encouraging of myself, start to engage in a way that is going to be more effective. Because once you start to focus on effectiveness, I think you can lose the emotionality pretty darn quick. Is that something you've been able to do in the past for yourself? Maybe not in this category, but in general.
Yeah, maybe off and on. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. And again, analyzing pitfalls versus risking, when we look at it from an effectiveness approach, that all of a sudden now over-analysis becomes a risk. And so there becomes a sweet spot where we have enough data to start moving forward.
Right.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've been watching the show, The Curse of Oak Island. Have you ever seen it? It's about this island off of Nova Scotia.
I've heard of that. I've seen that somewhere on YouTube or
yeah, Netflix. I think it's on both Prime and Netflix now, I think. But they're basically looking for treasures, and everything is kind of a cost analysis. They look at the clues they have, they look at how much it's going to cost to perform certain tasks, and it's really interesting watching the team navigate with each other. And it's all this stuff that you're talking about. What are the pitfalls? What are the payoffs? Because they're investing massive amounts of money in it. They're coming up with lots of dead ends. That the optimism, like getting themselves excited and then having it crash down. It's a really interesting piece to watch the different personalities and how they navigate it. And some people's enthusiasm of like every time they're like sure that they're going to find what they've never found before, even though they've been at it for years. And every time they're like, this is it, and other guys are like, well, we'll see what happens. It's just really interesting to watch everybody's way of navigating the whole thing.
So why would people do that though? I mean, I think we all do that, or I know I do it from time to time, but why do we do things over and over and over? I mean, there's that quote, what is it, Einstein or something? You can do the same thing over and over. That's the definition of insanity or something like that. Why
it's. I really think it's us seeking. There's a certain part of us that feels comfortable in patterns. It's a way. I think it's connected with how we know love, how we know safety and security, and setting ourselves up and crashing. For a lot of people, if that's been their early childhood, they tend to, what I know is upper limiting. They get to a certain level of success, and then they do something to sabotage it and crash it back down again, and just get back into their comfort zone, get back into how they've known life. And so, yeah, this is all about breaking that pattern of seeking comfort. And there's a certain comfort for you in analyzing and overanalyzing. And then it becomes, what was your most comfortable place becomes a prison. And then you're like, oh, I got to get out of here. And so you just prison break rather than using the analysis to really work for you in certain situations.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Yeah. And as we start to decipher this and break it down, we start to just choose differently. And the work we're going to do is going to give you more space internally to have that awareness and less congestion. Because I would say when you do that flip, like going from cautious to impulsive, that it's not in a cognitively clear place. It's in a level of, I'm massively uncomfortable right now, and I need to just do something to break that up.
Mm-hmm.
Does that feel true?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we're on the right track here. This is good.
Yep.
All right. So now the motivation stage in motivating. Stress management being a 6, which is reasonable. It carries you to a certain point, which allows you. It's like just enough for you to allow yourself to endure maybe a little longer than is necessary, but also it gives you a cracking point, which is like if this were a 7 or 8, when you decide you need to get out, that stress management would give you just a little bit more bandwidth to use your analysis, and there'd be less flip, if that makes sense too.
Right.
And yet the self-motivated is nice and healthy too here with a 7. So it generally puts you in poised achievement, a little bit in stressed achievement, but, and this is one where there was a little bit of fluctuation in the answer. So I would say stress management in certain situations right now that it's almost like having a raw spot on your skin. It's like, I'm fine everywhere else, but as soon as it touches that spot, like, it changes everything.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So any questions on that one? Even though it shows the poised achievement, I would bet, and it doesn't show a flip, but I would just say there's certain areas in your life right now that I'll bet it doesn't feel that way.
Yes, that's true.
Nice. All right, so now we move into driving, getting it done. And so this is a warmth and empathy for you as a 9. And it's interesting because looking at your energy field and how you interact, you do have a really strong emotional body. And what that means is that you end up being quite empathic. You end up feeling a lot of other people's feelings. And then you end up developing coping mechanisms to deal with that. So I think you get very heady when you're feeling a lot of that emotional energy. It gives you a place, and going to analysis, trying to get clear by whenever that other people's emotional energy is overrunning you, you tend to just go very much into your brain. Is that how you know yourself too?
Yes. Yeah, I've always been that way.
Yeah, and so it's that part of that analyzing pitfalls being a 10 is it's like your safety relief valve. When things get confusing, you're like, I'll just start analyzing, trying to get clear. And then if the clarity doesn't come the flip comes. And so a lot of the work we'll be doing will really help reduce all that static that drives you, that triggers you into deep analysis, and it'll allow for a greater balance between just being able to feel into things. And yeah, I think the risk is going to move differently too, because you're going to start to receive things differently, just how they show up in your awareness.
So the flip right there, that's on the harsh side. What does that mean?
So let's look at this. So basically, whenever I see a 5, like you have an enforcing, that 5s are almost always artificial, meaning that because your warmth and empathy is so high, I would bet that enforcing doesn't come that easy to you. And that when you want everything to feel good, you want the people around you to feel good, because when they don't feel good, that shows up in your inner world too, and you don't feel good. And so when you have to enforce, it never feels good to have to lay down the law. Like there's a part of you is like, I've been nice about this. Now I'm in this uncomfortable position where I have to be much more like I have to call people out, so to speak. And so with that being an uncomfortable place, I would say your natural place is probably more like a 3, but because you know it's important, you've artificially pushed it up to a 5. Like you make yourself do it. But when you have to do it, and particularly if it doesn't work easily, like they don't seem to be getting the hints, now all of a sudden I'm going to have to flip to harsh because I tried to say it nice. You obviously didn't get it. I don't know if you don't care. I don't know, why you're not responding to this. If you're just dense, but now because I'm so uncomfortable and having to push outside of my comfort zone, I'm going to show up a bit harsher because I'm upset that I have to go this far with you.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Sorry, someone was just coming in.
Yeah, no worries.
We're good.
All right, awesome. And so that can show up at home, it can show up at work, and it's basically like, look what you're making me do, and I'm super uncomfortable in it, and I'm pissed at you now for making me have to do this.
Right.
And so the harshness comes out, and so again, you end up in half in permissive, half in compassionate enforcing. I would bet if you didn't know the value of compassionate enforcing, you'd be mostly in permissive because of the discomfort of having to enforce stuff.
Mm.
And it may be different, like with kids or with that, but in situations where and I really see this a lot where like, okay, we've already established the rules. For me to have to enforce them now, I'm not sure why that's happening.
Yeah, I see that probably more in my family than maybe work.
Right. Sorry, there's somebody walking up to my door for some reason. I don't know why. So hopefully, sorry, can you give me just 1 second?
Sure.
I'm not sure why that. Over in our section? Yeah. Okay, yeah. Okay. Oh. What time was it this morning? 6:55. Okay. I heard noise. Hey, Russ, sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem.
They apparently in the wee hours of the morning, somebody was in my backyard with a bike. So I'm hoping it wasn't mine. I'll have to check it after.
Jeez.
Then climbed over our fence and went that way with it. Huh. That's cool. There's a neighborhood watch. I didn't even know that existed. That guy must have been up, and some older dude who's up in the middle of the night. Well, we'll see. That's yeah. I do a lot of cycling, so I have some kind of expensive bikes back in my garage. It should be locked up, but
Uh-oh.
We'll see. Insurance is always a thing. So yeah, I apologize for that little interruption.
No problem.
All right. So let's see. We were on stress management. So yeah, we were on the warmth and empathy and the driving. And so does this make sense that compassionate enforcing, and would you say that's true that because you know the value of enforcing that you push yourself out of your, you've pushed that up a bit to
I don't know if I totally understand what that means as far as compassionate enforcing.
okay, so basically it's like finding the warmth and empathy and enforcing at the same time. And so like the opposite, the kind of imbalance in this would be the harshness. Like I'm just enforcing. I'm not worrying about showing up warm. I'm not worrying about looking at things from a perspective. And the other side is like I'm looking at everything from that warmth. The permissive is I don't feel really comfortable, like calling you out or. And so the balance between the two is I'm going to be direct in my communication, but I'm also going to be warm and empathetic at the same time. And so it's like, so I've noticed some things, and I think it's really important that we talk about them as opposed to like, you've been doing this, or the opposite is like, okay, well, I'll just, they weren't getting them done. So maybe I'll just kind of do them behind the scenes. And it's a practical way of being direct and still warm at the same time.
And so the flip there is sometimes I just kind of snap then? Is that what
it would be showing up like I've been warmth and empathetic. That obviously didn't work. So now I'm going to try the other end of the spectrum.
Okay.
And you may not think about it logically, but it's just like, okay, like I've been nice about this. I don't know what the hell's wrong with you. Like, this is what needs to happen.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so that enforcing too, whenever I see a 5, there's often either it's something that you've overdone in the past and you felt like, oh, this is too much, and so you've wanted to correct it, or it's been something where I wasn't enforcing enough, so I'm pushing myself to be more enforcing. And so I would guess because the warmth and empathy is so high, it's probably something where like you're pushing yourself to be more enforcing because you know of the value of it.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yep.
All right. Next is implementing. So this is communication. So now that we've got our plan, we're motivated to do it. Now we're putting into action. So this is communication once we're in the stage of doing. And so this is where your communication often becomes much more direct, right? So you went from high warmth and empathy, lower enforcing, to high frankness. And then the diplomacy. Now, and this is an interesting piece because this is often driven by that discomfort of like, okay, here's what we're doing. If anybody's against us, like it feels like a big problem if anybody's not falling in line. And so I would bet in this case, it's like the opposite of what it was in the motivating stage. That I would say that the frankness is so high that the 5 now, remember how I was saying 5s tend to be fabricated, that you're probably pushing yourself to be more diplomatic at this stage. So you went from being super diplomatic to now like, okay, now that we're all clear, here's what we're doing. We've all decided on it. So I have permission now to be direct and talk clearly about it. And anybody that's going against what we've already decided, like it's really hard for me to feel diplomatic. In fact, it's so hard that I may be evasive at times because it's like, how do you not get this? We just decided this and now you're not doing it.
Right.
How does that one?
Yeah, that totally fits. The flip there, so what is that saying then?
That one's the evasive. So it's kind of like this should be so clear that like I don't know how to find the diplomacy in me to discuss it with you. So I just feel like it's safer for me not to say anything. Like I'm going to walk away because I feel like I'm going to bite your head off if I do talk to you about it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You know that one.
Yep.
And so this is a place where if the diplomacy is just a little bit higher, like it'll be more forthright diplomacy. But because and this is part of the logical piece for you, like once we've all come to an agreement, like we're at consensus, like we know what we're doing moving forward, and you're not doing it, like this is just not acceptable. Like
Yeah, that makes
somebody's not
sense.
on board. Yeah. Awesome. So now the next level of the implementing is innovation. And this is now the experimenting being quite high for you, a 9, which is really cool because it also works really well with analyzing pitfalls. When you tie the enjoyment for experimenting in with the analyzing pitfalls, and I'm kind of talking off the chart here for a minute, as your sense of risk becomes more comfortable, the experimenting will show up in more places. And that's really, I think, what we were talking about when we first got on the call was how can you be more experimenting in your life with finding your way through the maze as opposed to you need to know where the maze is going before you get there or before you start into it.
Right.
So since this is the implementing stage, persistence is quite strong, and the experimenting is, so you end up being mostly inventive, slightly in the non-finishing where you may get a little bit discouraged. But there's also this flip of like, okay, once I've got my plan and I've committed to it, you may just put your head down and just keep moving forward, even when other people would have given up long ago.
Yeah.
Because of your commitment to the plan.
That's the stubborn persistence.
Yeah, the little flip
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I'm trying to think of how to apply each of these things or how to look at it.
Yeah, and
home or work or whatever.
Right. And what happens too is sometimes the ones that like there's certain things that I was really caught up in on my Harrison the first time I took it. I'm like, I just don't see it. I don't know. And I hadn't had much experience with it to trust the document over my own self-perception. And then I started living and doing things. I'm like, oh, this is me doing that right now. You know?
Right.
And so it's one of those things when you take it forward in your life, you start to go like, oh, okay, yeah, I see it. So once it's in your awareness, like it highlights it. And,
right.
And it creates change too, because we're like, oh, well, that's not working for me. It's about effectiveness.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, as we move into delegation, now here collaboration being an off the charts one for you. And I would say that, again, it's probably not in all areas of your life. Like when you're working with people that you don't see eye to eye with, but you're also meeting more and more people now that probably through Satori Prime that you really want to collaborate with. Like it feels powerful. And so the authoritative being a 6 puts you in authoritative collaborative, tiny bit in defers decisions, but not much at all. And then when you're clear, the flip for you, if you start to get frustrated or feel like things are getting bogged down, or people are getting, getting kind of lost in it, is that there is an authoritarian flip where you may become more direct, more step into a bolder leadership. But it's like being easygoing, be easygoing to like, okay, somebody's got to take charge, so it's me right now, and then jumping forward. Do you know that one too?
Yes. Yeah, I think I can see that. It's just funny because this whole collaborative thing is so high. It looks like for me.
Yeah, it's your biggest one out of all of them.
Yeah, but at the same time, I'm struggling with the current situation. Like, is this maybe more of an ideal?
Yeah, it's what you're craving
to be that way. Like, I really enjoy it, but I just don't get it.
Yeah, and quite often, it's like the grass is always greener type thing too. So if we're in a place where the collaboration isn't happening, we're like, oh my God, I just wish I had competent people or people I saw eye to eye with to work with. It's like one of the things that shows up for people that have a crappy boss sometimes is, wants great leadership or something along those lines. And so it's not necessarily that they crave that, but when it's a deficit, it's exactly what they want.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I can see that for sure.
Yeah. And I would say that as that corrects more in your life and things become more collaborative, it'll probably drop down to like a 7 or 8. But right now it's a 10 because it's not what's available to you.
Right.
Any questions on those? Was that all?
No, I'm good on that.
Awesome. Yeah, these charts are interesting, aren't they?
Really interesting.
Nice. So now the next phase now is the maintaining. And so this is interpersonal. And so it's power dynamics. And so you are naturally a very helpful person, 9 up here. And then the assertiveness is a 6. And so you at times may have a tendency to sit back a little bit, but also, it's fairly balanced. And so you end up generally in mutual help, sometimes a little bit in self-sacrificing. But you also have the flip, and it's a small one, but to dominating. And so if you're trying to help somebody out and they just don't seem to be getting it, there may be a tendency to reach over their shoulder and just start to type on their keyboard type of thing of like, no, it's like this.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. Well, you know what? I can see that in both work and personal stuff, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not a strong one. And generally, you're in the top right quadrant. It's just that your helpful is so high. Like if you're helpful, say the assertiveness was, even if it was a 6, but if your helpful was a 7, you wouldn't have that flip of dominating. You would just be more mutual help.
Right.
But there'd also be times you'd be more self-sacrificing, times you'd be more needs avoidance and more dominating. So this, basically, you're almost always in mutual help, tiny bit self-sacrificing, and then the flip to dominating. So it's quite healthy, really.
Right.
Then organization in the maintaining stage. Now, again, we have a 5, which is flexible. And again, I would bet that, well, I don't know. It's interesting. I'm curious to hear what you say on this one, but organized being an 8, so it's pretty high. But the 5, and remember I was saying 5s tend to be fabricated a little bit, like either you were overly flexible at one point or you weren't flexible at all. And so you're pushing yourself to intentionally be more flexible, or you're like, I shouldn't be so flexible. And so it ends up either rigidly organized or flexibly organized. And then a small flip to scattered if you get too probably just through frustration and overwhelm with trying to organize things. And so would you say with this 5 in flexibility, would you say that you used to be more flexible or less flexible? Or is
I'm
it
probably
situational
more
again?
flexible now.
You're more flexible now?
I think so.
Yeah, I would bet that would make sense. Generally, flexibility is about comfort. And so like if you're feeling like you're not trusting where things are going, and you're not trusting the people you're working with, you end up being less flexible. But I would say that I would bet that through feedback and through trying to work with others, you've pushed yourself to a 5, even though you'd probably like to be less flexible.
Right. Yeah, that's probably true.
Nice. And then the last one here, strategic acumen, we look at optimism again. So if you remember at the beginning here, we looked at optimism in that top right here, of analyzing pitfalls, which is a 10. We put it against risking, and now we're putting it against optimism. So this is in the maintaining phase. So analyzing pitfalls is a 10, optimism is a 4. And so it puts you in generally skeptical, sometimes a little bit into realistic optimism, but your flip, which is a pretty big one, is blindly optimistic. You may be like, this is the pill, like this is the one that's going to solve the problem. And so it doesn't mean that it's unwarranted, but it probably leads to some disappointments when it's not the solution.
What would be an example of that? Like how that flip might, not necessarily for me, but just kind of.
Yeah, so it's like, so say that you're stuck in a problem at work, and you're like, how do we navigate this? And then somebody comes in who's an expert, and they're like, oh, well, these are the services I offer, and you're like, oh my God, awesome, this is what we're looking for. We're going to hire this person, they're going to solve the problem. And then you realize that they're basically doing the same thing you already did. You're just paying them a lot of money to do it.
Right.
And so that blindly optimistic of feeling like getting caught up in the idea of like it's almost like the magical solution is here.
So this is kind of interesting. The
Mm-hmm.
way you just described that, I would say perfectly describes my father-in-law.
Interesting.
Because I'm technically a contractor for his company doing marketing stuff, but
Okay.
I sort of live in the gray area between employee. I'm here all the time, and so I'm kind of looked at as an employee, but I'm not paid as an
Mm-hmm.
employee, kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a family business. It's a private school, um, preschool through 12
Oh,
chain of
cool.
schools. And the one thing that has driven me crazy
Mm.
over the years, and I don't know how this ties in between me noticing that and him and it showing up for me.
Mm-hmm.
But what he does all the time, like to the point where it's like a running joke at the company,
Mm-hmm.
is he's just obsessed with um, contractors, or I don't want to say contractors, but consultants.
Mm-hmm.
So he has a very hard time trusting people that he's already hired or worked with or
Yeah.
whatever. But he has no problem. Like, for example, let me give you an example. So let's say there's an idea that I have or had to do whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and I even got a lot of buy-in. Like, this is a great thing. Let's run with this.
Yeah.
But it gets shot down, through whatever channels.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say a year later, some random consultant, he meets at a meeting or some meetup thing or whatever,
Yeah.
proposes something. All of a sudden, he's just gung ho about this idea, brings in the consultant. Everyone starts thinking it's great because he thinks it's great, and there's kind of a lot of butt kissing going on.
Yeah.
And then I tell him, like, hey, do you remember that I brought this exact same thing up to
Right.
you a year ago?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, then he'll start questioning my competency,
Yeah.
like all. By the way, I'm kind of getting into what frustrates me
Yeah. No,
so
it's good.
much
It's good.
these days, because this is like an endless cycle that I go through.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he'll hire this consultant to come in to do what they said they're going to do. They do more often than not do a bad job,
Mm-hmm.
and then leadership is basically scratching their head afterwards, going, "How did we screw up with this?"
Yeah.
When it could have been done earlier and better
Mm-hmm.
with people they already had,
Yeah.
but they don't. Like, they
Yeah.
just don't trust anyone internally.
Trusting the
They're always
unknown over the known.
exactly. It's really weird, but at the same time, it's funny because I'm trying to see that in my own life because I don't. I'm trying to picture that, but that's exactly what he does and what
Mm-hmm.
frustrates me so much around here.
Yeah.
But it's showing up for me, which is kind of interesting. I don't know what that means.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, it's funny. I think that example came through. Like, I mean, basically, like I'll just see examples, and they're often relevant to the person's life. Um, and so I think that example came through to see that in your father-in-law. So looking at it more specifically to you, let's just see what shows up. Mm, yeah, so uh, I think this is like connected with your maze, where you're like, okay, what is it that's the forward moving piece is maybe an idea of like, well, maybe it could look like this, and getting super optimistic about it, and then like taking the first step and be like, that wasn't it, or starting to dive in with it. And so that piece of like, it's like you allow yourself to fill with fuel and optimism, and then it's like, that's not it. And so that piece where it's like, it's funny. I was just seeing, how with race cars they have those the gas bottles where they can just flip up and like
Mhm.
open up the big opening at the end and they just drain right into the tank.
Right.
Like you get that surge of like, I'm full of fuel, and then it's like, um, the letdown afterwards. And so that whole piece of like, when do you find yourself elated? When do you find yourself full of fuel, and then start to analyze it and realize there's a problem with it. And so you may not have even fired the engine, but you filled up the tank and got all excited, and then realized that that wasn't what you hoped it was.
You know what? Actually, now that you've kind of explained that, there have been times where, because I've been searching, like,
Mhm.
where do I fit? Where am I the best to be
Mhm.
doing whatever it is that I can do?
Yeah.
I think I've been sucked into. I don't want maybe sucked in. Maybe is fits in some circumstances, but
Hmm.
maybe into some kind of a program. Like, for example, I got involved with trying to sell on Amazon a few years back.
Yeah.
And I kind of blindly went into it a little bit, just kind of like, well, I know of a handful of people that have been successful with this, so I'm just going to do it, kind of a thing. So is that maybe what that's meaning a little
Absolutely,
bit?
yeah. And then you're filling with that enthusiasm, which is also what makes you more skeptical sometimes in the future, because then you're like, I've gotten sucked into these things before. They didn't pan out the way I wanted them to. I should have done more research, all those things. And so it kind of works for you and then against you. And so this is about balance, right? This is about, when you look at this chart, if the analyzing pitfalls was, say, an 8, where it's really a healthy amount, not overdoing it, and you start to have more successes because you're moving forward more, the optimism starts to grow up. And now you're like an 8 and an 8, and now you're squarely in realistic optimism. You're not stuck in skeptical or flipping to blindly optimistic, because you get so frustrated, like, my God, like, what does it even matter now? Like, all I know is I can't stay here. I'm so sick of this. Like, I'm going to, try one of these things and just go for it and see what happens. And then it becomes disappointing, which then lowers the optimism in the future. Should I analyze more? So now I'm going to analyze again. And it's just that loop.
Right.
And so when we're already in the realistic optimism, we tend to just take steady, measured steps forward, and move in. We become more comfortable in discovery, which I think is something you really enjoy. But I don't think you've ever necessarily applied it to your own exploration of what lights you up in life. It's been in smaller categories. Like, do you like to play games and solve puzzles? Is that?
I like to play certain games. I've played volleyball my whole life.
Oh, cool.
Kind of my
Nice.
thing. Yeah, to an extent. I just. I had something I was going to say. I totally forgot.
Was it about that measured step forward, about finding your way through the maze, about seeing this as a game rather than becoming more comfortable allowing the optimism?
Has something to do with your comment about maybe applying this in certain areas, but not kind of the bigger scale of things.
Probably places where the consequences feel lower. That it can be like, this is okay to play here, but this other stuff, this is serious, so I can't play here.
I know what it was. It was, if I could just do anything I wanted, and maybe this isn't accurate, I don't know, but if I could just do anything, I would probably be like a National Geographic adventure photographer or something.
Awesome.
Like, we really love just going out into the middle of nowhere, taking pictures, being a little bit of a dangerous situation.
A little exhilarating.
I love doing stuff like that. Yeah. But at the same time, I have 4 kids now. I have a mortgage, and so there's this just tension, I feel like, in my life where there's, the more comfortable I've got with who I am personally, it's not only with work, but it's kind of created this rift just in my own being, where there's days where I almost wish that I could just rewind 20 years or something, where I wasn't married, didn't have any kids, and I could just explore and just do these things I want to do. But now I feel kind of caged in a way, not in a bad way. I mean, I love my wife and my kids. That's, I wouldn't have that any other way. But at the same time, I just feel like I want to do some of these things. But I have to pay my mortgage and expenses, and so I don't know. I feel kind of trapped in that way.
No, it's super common, right? It's particularly as we start to like get on with our life and the next stages are here. It's like so let me share a quick concept with you. I know we're 10:37 now, so we're running over a little bit, but I want to share this quick concept with you, really quick, that I call it's about the gatekeeper. And so generally what happens is we go through life. Here, let me, 1 second here. I'll stop the share. Um, so we go through life, and in life we find things where we get stuck, and we look for mentors that are going to help us break free. Sometimes those mentors are a relationship. It could be our spouse or future spouse. It could be a new job. It could be a literal mentor, like a person that helps us see ourselves in a new way. And so when we get stuck, we come across problems. So maybe it's loneliness, maybe it's wanting to start a family, and so we meet that mentor, that person that breaks us free from that gate that we were stuck at, right? And so if the gatekeeper was, I want to have a family, and I want to settle down, the person that breaks you through is going to be your wife, right? And then we come up with new problems. And now the person that was our savior becomes our new gatekeeper. And it's really interesting. What happens is we start to position our thinking in, like, this is keeping me from that. And even though it was what I wanted, what saved me from the last thing, now I'm stuck and I'm being held back by this. You were my savior, now you're my gatekeeper. And so there's a really interesting piece that, in order to, there's two aspects to it. There's one is our perspective on it, right? And then the other one is the person who's being my gatekeeper, or the situation's being my gatekeeper, allowing me to evolve and move in relation to that relationship. And so if it's at work and you're having, these new senses of how you want to show up, these new senses of wanting to be seen. And there's another piece I want to tie back into in a minute too, which is about receiving recognition. That when we awaken a part of ourselves, and the mentor said, well, this is who you are to me now, and we grow, all of a sudden now, if they're not allowing us to shift and be seen and expressed in our new way, they become our new gatekeepers. And then we look for something else, some sort of other mentor, to break us free from that gatekeeper. And so it's really about keeping the dynamics of our relationship more fluid in how we allow ourselves to be in relation to each other, and allowing for growth to be acknowledged, accepted, and enjoyed and appreciated. Because as soon as we still want the person to be who they were in relation to us, like, that's where we get stuck. And so you're seeing that happen a lot at work. It was probably like this great opportunity working for your father-in-law at one point. I'm sure there's probably some, like, how's this going to look long-term? And maybe even not have thought of it long-term. But then there's like, okay, now there's this gatekeeper energy for me. And so how do I get to be grown and allow the person who was helping me still to be a positive relationship, because they have to also be able to see me differently. And if both parties don't allow for that, then it becomes a gatekeeper relationship. And that's
Right.
where the stuck energy happens. And so on your chart too, let me double check it, but I think that on wants recognition, it was one of your lower ones. Let me see, wants recognition. A 4.0, desire for positive acknowledgement from others related to one's abilities and strengths. And as we've been talking, I would say that there's a conflict within you of that wanting recognition is a positive trait, and that you haven't really given yourself permission to want recognition. Like, I shouldn't need recognition. Like, it's needy. It's something that people that are less developed, or less evolved need. But the opposite of wanting recognition is being discounted. And when you talked about your father-in-law, there was a lot of feeling discounted. And so if we put those on the same continuum, then maybe there is a stronger desire to want recognition. And maybe that's actually super healthy, because it hasn't been happening. And so plugging this into life at home, plugging this into your relationship with your kids, plugging this into work, how has that been showing up for you, with you devaluing a desire for recognition because it feels unhealthy, as opposed to going, I'm really kind of tired of not being recognized. And if I put a little more value into that, maybe I'll invite more of that into my life. And it will really help me recognize myself, because that's really tied into how you treat yourself as well.
Wow, that's I haven't even thought of it that way. I think you're spot on, actually. Um, yeah, I think you just perfectly described it. I haven't really thought about that before, but as you're talking, I'm just like, oh my gosh. Especially when you said the opposite would be discrediting. It's kind of like, what's the last thing I want is to be discredited. But if that's the opposite of wanting recognition, then maybe I do want recognition, but I've sort of, like you said, sort of talked myself into believing it's not a more advanced trait or something like that. I don't know. And I rarely get it, which is one of the problems, not just with me, but just the culture here in general. There's virtually no recognition, like to the point where it's, I mean, there's people that leave all the time just because no one ever says even thank you. I mean, it's really bad.
It's chronic in schools. It's hilarious because how do you motivate a student? Positive feedback, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then when it comes to the administration and the teacher relationship, and even the employee relationship, it's like, oh, that's for kids. Like we just, like it gets lost in the next leveling, as opposed to like we all, like it all feeds us. And when we feel appreciated, when we feel like, man, you are making a difference here, like, great, I feel like even more like making a difference now. But when it's just passed over, it's like, well, and it zaps the juice out of us too, right? It's like, okay, you got that done, good. All right, so moving on. You're like, yeah, I just spent like 72 hours working on this thing. Like, I was really proud of it, and you just said, oh, it's done? Okay, thank you.
Exactly. And then on top of that, one thing I really hate, that I don't know if it came up in here somewhere, but I really, really don't like doing meaningless work or just busy work stuff, which sometimes well, I know for a fact in some cases, then a lot of other times it feels like maybe it's unintentional, but it's just, here's some stuff to do just because I don't understand what you do. And I feel like I need to just give you something to do, when in reality I'm swamped with all kinds of other stuff that I need to be doing, but now I've got this busy work that was thrown on me because I guess I'm kind of feeling, I feel discredited, and maybe I'm emanating that or something, and they just pile more of it on, or I don't know. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, and I mean, that could be, it's interesting if you are a bit of a utility player at the school, that could be a project that you could start to introduce, is the idea of acknowledgement and appreciation of all the people doing such hard work. I mean, what a beautiful thing. Like, how would that change the environment, the work environment of the place? It gets passed on to the kids, it gets passed, through the whole system.
Right.
How does that feel?
Well, this whole recognition thing, for some reason, like that probably hit me harder than anything else we've even talked about today. Which is weird, because that's the last thing I was thinking would like resonate or something. But I want to chew on that a little bit.
It's
because maybe I'm just not being honest with what not intentionally dishonest, but maybe just not really.
It's outside of your awareness.
Right. I've kind of built up some kind of some sort of a story about why I don't need it or something, as maybe a way of coping with not ever getting it.
And what do the people look like that did receive it? All the time we develop stories that way of like, oh yeah, they're the people that are seeking it versus that it naturally happens. And no part are you going to be somebody who seeks out, yet receiving it would be fantastic.
Well, it's kind of a humble, like I try to be humble. I don't want to like toot my horn and stuff. And it always bugs me when people are just overly like, hey, look what I've done, praise me. Like, it kind of bothers me a little bit when people do that. And so I think maybe I kind of go polar opposite.
Absolutely. You correct it within yourself by not allowing any of it. for yourself.
Right.
Yeah. Well, this is a big one, man. It's kind of exciting of what did that look like of, and a lot of times it's receptivity, like when we're open up to it, and giving it, okay. So here's another really important piece is I have this theory that's, it's pretty obvious, but it basically says what we most crave within ourselves is what we tend to give to others. And so when we also don't value something, we tend to not give it to others as much too. And so when you start to become more open in your recognition and your appreciation of others, that will open up the reciprocity. It will open up the, like, well, okay, good job, moving on. As opposed to like, I just want to take a minute to sit here to recognize like how hard you worked on that. And I'm really impressed. That was awesome. And it's really going to help us in this, and this. So thank you.
Right.
Yeah. How does that feel?
Cool. Well, it feels good.
Yeah. And it changes the culture.
Yeah.
Because then people feel like, oh my God, I felt so great when Russ said that to me, and then they pass it on to other people when they get the bravery to do it.
Right. I'm going to chew on that one.
That's awesome. Sweet. So the rest of the Harrison now there's some great information there, and I really recommend you look it over. And just, it's about your greatest strengths. It's also about how to manage yourself too. So it's about kind of getting in touch with what makes you feel good and what makes you feel inspired and what makes you feel devalued. But that continuum of being devalued versus being acknowledged is a big one. And so when we start playing with those paradoxes in those continuums, it starts to awaken understandings within ourselves that change things.
Right. So all these job, I did notice at the very end here, there were a bunch of jobs and just things that it came up with.
Yeah. A lot of teaching stuff, huh?
Yeah. I mean, what do I do with this?
I would say that a lot of these are the, I think it's the least effective part of the Harrison. Okay. So I would see it as a grain of salt, with a grain of salt. And I would also, one of the things that I think is very interesting in this is that you actually, I think that there's this passion that hasn't quite lit in you of creation, of going and doing. And so I thought it was really something that really jumped out for me is a lot of the things on there were about teaching. And teaching is, there's this quote. I used to be a school teacher, by the way. I taught for 12 years. And there's this quote from, what movie is that? Is it School of Rock, maybe? Where when Jack Black's like substituting and he's like, yeah, those who can't do, teach.
Right.
And there's something there for you, like that fire that's ready to light around. I want to go out and start doing some of these things versus, being in the academia of it, of teaching people how the process and the I'm like that desire to implement, the desire to go out and create. I think is really alive in you, and it's been something that you're almost afraid to light the pilot on because it could be so disruptive.
That is 110% true.
Awesome.
And I don't know. I know we're kind of over time. Just give me like 1 minute. I'll just explain something really quick. There's a few things I know about myself that I just know I'm good at. I'm good at coming up with explaining things that maybe more complicated things in an easier to digest way or something.
Right.
I've always been good with doing that. I've had people tell me that, which is why I'm pretty sure I'm good at doing that.
Right.
And so I watch a lot of videos on YouTube and stuff about people explaining this or that or this, whatever, that kind of stuff. And every single time I watch these things, I'm thinking, I could do that, or I could create something like that. I could create something that explains it even better. And so, not in an arrogant way. It's just that person had like 5 million views about this thing, and I kind of think they screwed up about half of how they did it. Like you could do it. It'd be more engaging if you did it this way. So I have thoughts like that, and there's
Yeah,
part of
no,
me that
that feels right
really
on.
something that I really want to do something. I don't know what it is, like
Hmm.
whether it's a YouTube channel or a
Yeah.
podcast or something.
Yeah, the YouTube
But
channel feels great. Like it really does. And it also, it's not a mutually exclusive event. You don't need to quit your job to do it.
yeah,
Yeah, it could also give you the freedom to quit your job eventually.
but as soon as I start thinking about that, the and this is stuff I haven't really talked specifically about this with Guy and Elon in the
Mhm.
past, like a YouTube channel or something like that. I haven't gone that granular with them, but as soon as I start having those kind of thoughts, and I actually start getting excited, like
Yeah,
every single time I think about doing that, it's kind of a yeah, but then immediately I get thoughts, you're too monotone. You're not dynamic enough.
yeah,
Who would ever subscribe to your channel? Who cares about what you're going to say? And so I just get this flood of stuff that comes into my head.
yeah,
And before I know it, I'm just kind of deflated and
yeah.
I'm back to normal again. And
Right.
and so I don't know how to. I know I've gained tools on how to kind of deal with the brain trying to
Hmm.
attack things and get more
Yeah,
kind of centered and stuff.
yeah. That inner critic.
But this one I can't. I haven't got over that. I don't know how to
Yeah,
deal with this because
yeah.
it's so the feeling of wanting to do this stuff is so strong.
Hmm.
It's almost like there's an equally strong balance
Yep,
that's attacking it at the
yep,
same time,
yep.
which is weird and it's hard to fight because it's like no matter how excited I get, the attack gets even heavier on
Yeah,
me.
it balances it, keeps it even, right?
Right. It's
Hmm.
so I guess I struggle with, well, what does that balance mean? Like it
Hmm.
does I mean, is it like a volcano where it's just pushing like it wants to come out and it's just going to explode, or is that
Yeah,
balance saying something to me like you shouldn't do this or something? I
yeah.
can't wrap my
And,
head
and so I
around.
would say that they're both coming from within you, right? And so it's a self-protective measure that comes in, and that it's that balance is also about at a certain point there needs to be an imbalance where either the fear moves or the motivation moves, and so when our discomfort really is what often drives our breakthroughs. When we become so uncomfortable, we're like, I can't spend another day in this, like to watch another expert get hired to do what I just suggested we do and get paid more than me for doing it. Like for me to be discredited, like I can't spend another day of being discredited. Like the fear of what is all of a sudden may stay in the same place, but the desire for something different goes bigger. Or we can decrease the fear. We can go, you know what? So what? Like, yeah, those are all possibilities. And, like, did that stop the person that just put that shitty video out that got 60,000 views? It didn't. And so who cares, right? And let that
Yeah.
fear just be like, yes, there's going to be comments that are like, you should take voice lessons or, like whatever, like it doesn't matter. Like, okay, great. Did you get, like you're one of the 60,000 people that just watched my video. Like, I'm sorry you didn't enjoy my voice. Did you enjoy the outcome? Like, oh yeah, that was awesome. Okay, great. So you found something to hate me about and you got the outcome and I get paid for my advertising or whatever. It's still right. And so that whole piece of like, it's never going to be about everybody being happy. It's never going to be about everybody being a fan. It's going to be about doing what you want to do and what lights you up and kind of reaching that point of like, okay, that's great. I don't give a shit.
So I guess the other part of it is like everything I just explained to you is kind of
Mhm.
hindering me from doing
Yep.
it. But then going full circle to what we first started talking about, I don't know what exactly to do at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah.
It's like
Well,
there's this
we'll get
mechanism that
into
needs
it.
to come out, but
We'll get into it. I think the work we're going to do over the next couple of weeks is going to be, uh, it's the first thing that happens is our multiple choice bank changes because our perspective changes.
mm,
And so, you've already felt it change right now, right? Like in this going through the Harrison, like, okay, now I'm starting to see the A, B, C, and D that's in that answer bank is changing and it's going to continue to change. And so when that changes to the one where you're like, okay, that's the answer, we start making choices. But it's about allowing things to be in flux, allowing crappy answer banks to show up for a little bit, until the right answer bank shows up, and not being patient with it. And there's nothing wrong in your life right now. And there's all this potential for next leveling. And so that's what we're going to play with. And as your perspective changes, your awareness changes, and your tolerance for what was diminishes, and your excitement for what can be increases, and you start making choices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Good stuff. And so should we set up your next date here?
Yeah. Let's see.
I'm excited to take you into the energetics of it all, because it's going to put you in a whole different.
Yeah. You know what? I don't know if I can. I'm on my phone right now.
Okay.
I don't know if I can open my calendar without disconnecting this. Do you know offhand?
I think you can. Yeah. Yeah. You should be able to.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah. Yeah. It should just run it in the background,
Okay.
I think.
Yeah. So how often do you typically want to do this, or how?
So the energetic sessions we do once a week. But having done the Harrison, just because there's integration time, that we can go in. I'm not sure what the rest of my week looks like, but we can do the first 2 sessions in the same week, and then go once a week after that.
Okay.
Let's see, I do have time on Halloween. I think everything else is pretty booked the rest of the week. Like earlier in the day on Halloween.
Let's see.
Which is Thursday.
So you wouldn't have any time in the early afternoon?
Let's see. I could do like 1:30. Would that work?
Yeah, actually, that works.
Or even 1:30 is great. Let's do that.
Yeah, that works for me.
All right. I'm going to send you an invitation right now here, so I'll put it in. I like to do that while we're on the phone. So that'll be 2 of 7. And so we're looking at Thursday the 31st. Let's see, and we said, I lost my calendar here now. So we said 2 o'clock, is it? Or no, we said 1:30, right?
Well, yeah, 1:30 or 2, whatever works for you.
Yeah, I better do 1:30, otherwise I'm gonna be. So it'll be 1:30 to 3. Awesome.
Cool.
Double checking, just making sure that matches up with the calendar, and I'll send it out to you. Yep, that's perfect. Schedule it, and then I'm gonna need your email again here, because I don't know if, hopefully it remembered it. Let's see. Actually, what is your email?
Tanner 2001 BYU@gmail.com.
Okay, there we go. I found you. Awesome. So you went to BYU? Cool.
I did.
Nice. Are you Mormon?
Yeah.
Nice. I've worked with a lot of Mormons. It's really an interesting thing that it's funny. We just moved to Ashland, Oregon, and like all my daughters, all of her new friends are all Mormon. It's pretty funny.
Oh, really?
But I worked with this young woman. This was fascinating. How old was she? She's in her early 20s. And as soon as I started I was doing kind of a psychic session for her, and there was like this group of women around her dressed in like traditional, like old time Mormon garb. And I'm like, there's like these 3 women that are standing around you, and they're like, oh, they're monitoring our session, and it's like they're ghosts, but they're not ghosts, like they're like your guardians or something. And they're like they said that you're their descendant, and that they're here to monitor this to make sure it's in alignment, and that they're here, like they oversee you. And she's like, oh, that's part of our belief system, is that when our ancestors to a certain age, that they stay with us to protect us. I'm like, well, that's happened. It was such a cool moment of like, wow.
Well, yeah, I mean, I haven't personally had anything like that happen specifically.
Yeah.
Like that. That's crazy.
Yeah, it was really cool.
But yeah, there is a strong belief in, people continuing after this life and family connections and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, they were like, it was like they were standing in the room, these 3 women. They were like overseeing, making sure that what we were doing was kosher.
So you see things like that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And it's often like kind of on a need to know basis, but it was funny. As soon as we dropped in, these three, like they were kind of like guardians that were like stepped between us and just wanted to know my intentions and know what we were up to before they let it proceed. And then they stepped back and monitored the whole thing. But it was hilarious. It was like we had a chaperones.
So you see, well, that's just super interesting. So they just kind of, are they looking at you, or like what do you
They were
see?
just present. Like at first, they just made themselves known. Like this literally it felt like chaperones. Like they were just there, like like okay, proceed, and we're watching you. It was super cool because like that hadn't happened ever, and so for me to explain that to her, she was like, "Oh, that's part of our belief system, yeah." And they were like, they said they were going to be with her until I think they said like they'd start to phase back at like I forget what age they said, but like 23 or 25, and then they would just be kind of present and they would let her start to make more of her own decisions. But until that point, they really direct her. It was fascinating. It was super cool.
How long have you been able to see stuff like that?
It opened up for me about when I was about 30. Like I was always in that, but I didn't really know. And then I went to see a lady who was a psychic, and it just blew me open. And all of a sudden, I was like seeing and hearing things and
Wow,
through the veil, so to speak.
that's cool.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of a fun part of all this. But yeah, it really changed my appreciation for Mormonism too.
Mm.
Like,
Well, I think it's an incredibly misunderstood religion in a
oh,
lot of
for sure.
ways.
Yeah,
Tons of misconceptions. I mean, I was just talking to someone the other day about it, and just like, geez, like, no, we don't believe that, or that, or that, or that.
yeah, totally.
But we're actually very surprised. I think it would surprise a lot of people how open
Hmm.
Mormons are to whether it's energy type stuff, or
Yeah,
because
yeah.
there's such a strong belief in the church of
Hmm.
science and things that we don't understand that are
Yeah.
just out there that
Yeah,
I
and
don't
for
know,
modern visitation too, relatively modern day visitation,
right?
for like the Angel Moroni to show up and for like there
Yeah,
to be like a real sense of like there's an interaction here. It's not something that was dictated long ago and just keep moving forward. It's like it's real time.
exactly.
It's pretty
Yeah,
cool that, yeah, it's super fascinating to me.
yeah,
Awesome.
cool.
Sounds great. So, I'll talk to you on Thursday then.
Sounds good.
All right, man. Well, I'm going to create a Dropbox for you, and I'll send a link to you with the recording so that you can have all
Great.
that. I'm going to go see if my garage still has a lock on it.
Sounds good.
Awesome, brother.
All right.
Yeah, great to
Thank you.
meet you in person. Bye-bye.
Bye.